What is up, dudes and dudettes? Neko here, and today we're going to talk about an important topic when it comes to art, and that is efficiency in art. And you know what? Let me get a full screen real quick. All right, so sometimes when you have a long project or you're doing a commission, you have client work, or you're trying to get into the industry and work professionally, one important aspect is time. Your client expects like quick turnaround time. Your boss is going to expect a quick turnaround time. You probably would benefit from a quicker turnaround time because you're spending less time torturing yourself over this artwork you're making, whether it's a painting, character designs, animation, whatever the like. As such, tools that help make things quicker or more efficient are pivotal in this artistic journey. And today I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks and just a few things and tools that I use that help make things quicker, more efficient when creating artwork, and kind of do it the right way. And by the right way, I mean, well, these are ways that are kind of feel like shortcuts, but aren't cheating. I guess, yes. So the key difference is these aren't things that will essentially do the work for you, but they will cut down a lot of the process. And they're pretty unique, like a very creative way of approaching this. But without further ado, let me go ahead and just show you on the canvas, because that's where you're gonna get it. Let's go into it. So here we are in the magical canvas. Anyway, yeah, this is a piece I've been working on. Well, I'm finished with, right? This was a piece I was working on a couple weeks ago, and I picked out this one because this completely defines what I mean. And at first glance, it looks like your typical painting, you know, clouds in the background, characters done. Must have taken a long time, just painstaking work. And I mean, it did take a few hours, sure, but there was a lot of rendering that was just not necessarily done because, I don't know, I utilized tools that would save time, right? What are these tools? Like, let me stop beating around the bush. What I'm talking about is creating assets for your work, for your illustrations, for your paintings, for concepts, the like. So I guess the best way to show this is to just break down the file here, right? So let me just peel away all these clouds and stuff and these characters. So if you look at this image, this is pretty much the base image I started with. I colored the sky, sure. I guess the sky was originally that, but this is the initial like black and white sketch I had. And I got this in about, 5-10 minutes. 5 minutes probably, actually. Like way less time. And you ask, how did I get all of these things, all these details in like five minutes, such a short amount of time? Well, what I did was I painted rocks. So let me explain. So these rocks and other rocks that I have as well, they should be there. These rocks. I have this file full of just random rocks that I painted, right? And the reason I spent like an entire day, a couple of days painting these rocks, and the reason I painted these rocks in this like kind of consistent style is that these are kind of like an asset page of rocks and cliffs. And I highly recommend everybody does this. This is a tip I got from Trent Kanuga. It's just to create like assets that you can throw in your paintings, right? So for example, when I like paint out these rocks, these are like, these have like rock textures, rock shapes. And whenever I'm doing a painting with like a cliffside or mountains or even just rock, large stone pebbles that are in like grasslands and stuff like that, anything that will require it, I can just take one of these rocks and like throw them in the scene and map and morph them to where they'll fit. And even if I've already like blocked out a certain cliff or anything, I can still take the rocks and use their textures. So I'm not certain if like you recognize these shapes or not, but they're the same shapes that are in this painting. So it was just a few brush strokes, a little bit of transform tool, and I already had like the composition laid out. Now, how did I do this so effectively? Well, I imagine if I spent my time just, copying, pasting these rocks into images, it'll be pretty fast, but that's a fairly time-consuming way of approaching it as well. And it doesn't seem like very effective to me. So what I did is I went into Clip Studio and I simply made a rock brush. So let me get rid of these real quick. Boom, rock brush. So when you go into Clip Studio, you take your lasso tool and you just select one of the things. You go to edit. Hold on. So you go to register material, go to image. Boom, and this screen pops up. You should be able to register the image. Wow. Well, it's not showing the image here because I'm on the wrong layer. Let me do it again. But you should be able to register the image. You can select use for brush shape. You can tag it with whatever tags you need to. You can name it whatever. You can put it in your image materials, anywhere you need to find it. Essentially, you put this in your database so Clip Studio can reference it whenever you're making brushes. So I'm going to cancel that out. I already have it. And so when we go to our brush tool, we can open up the settings. They're on another screen. Here, we can open the settings here, go to brush tip shape. In this material tab, you can click on add brush tip shape and we can just, what did I call it? Rock? I have a lot of different rocks actually. So here we go. But these are the ones I made, right? And you can select one, two of them, all of them, and throw them into the brush. So what this does is this kind of just allows me to just import all the kind of mountains in here, and I can get like interesting shapes as long as I'm like painting with the brush. So now I can just start mapping out compositions with all these brushes in line. And this particular brush, like I definitely have multiples of them and I had to play with the settings because this seems like very specific. And as you can tell, like the details of like the previous brush is kind of like ruining it and getting in the way. But when that's the case, you just switch to this one, which is having some issues loading. They're every brush sizes. And then you start importing this, and this one has a little bit of color jitter. So this is just another way of like mapping out the same thing. So you could use this to map out like a base form and come back to this one. And hold on, I should probably switch the setting to like, where's the setting? Subcolor? No. Well, maybe I'll have to do a new layer, right? Anyway, you just paint in this one that it's like multiply or something and like it blends in. Anyway, you could work with it, right? But essentially the point is get you a nice mountain there immediately. And this isn't all because I have a ton of them, right? So I have like this specific mountain set brush. So this has more of like variety of shapes. This goes for a certain like consistency, like more vertical. So some of the more jagged, like horizontal shapes aren't in there because sometimes they mess up like the overall base shapes. They can be kind of like tough to work with. Then I have like a specifically jagged one. Let's turn down the size on that. And as you can see, those are all the same color. And then I have this one, which is good for like distant mountains, and they just kind of like create like this 1,000 needles type of like tons of spires throughout the landscape, and you just change the size just for ones that are closer, ones that are further away. And it helps like map things out like very quickly. And you could use kind of this idea for anything really, right? You could use it for leaves, mountains, buildings, brushes. People are a little more difficult because people have like tons of different variables and angles. It's not as easy, but you could still do the same thing for clouds. You could still do the same thing for trees. So I highly recommend creating like just asset sheets, like all in your style. That way, whenever you need to create something, you've already painted it. You take something in the asset sheet and bring it back into the painting. This, I don't know what this is. This is just like one of the experimental brushes I was playing with. I did this with other things like tattoos. These are like my tattoo brush sets, where I have like tattoo patterns that like fit in. And you know, you can just draw these tattoo patterns in however. I mix and match them sometimes, and when I mix and match them, I get like new interesting combinations and designs. And it's great for consistency because some characters have like a specific tattoo, and I can just draw the tattoo and it just lays out on top. Totally easy to deal with. I don't have to draw it like for 2 hours over and over again because they have like a very intricate tattoo system. And I got a tree one too. Let me see if I can find where I put my tree brushes. Oh, here we go. We have the tree brushes down here. So we have this pine tree brush. We bump up the size so it can be seen. So here, you know, we have these pine trees. I can just like paint them together and kind of like map out a concept of like pine trees or whatever. Put some up close, some far away. You know, obviously you won't paint them like this because this is a little clustered. But let's say you had some like foreground pine trees. You wanted to make a layer in the background. And let's see, let's drop it to 600, like halfway. And you have some pine trees that go back like this. You leave a little path. And then you just another layer. Let's make it even smaller. And pine trees that kind of like make up the distance. And we just drop it even more. Another layer. You have pine trees going out to the horizon, and they look relatively generic, but that's just the composition in general. So you could have like hills and mountains of pine trees coming down like this, that, and since this last layer is so, I mean, it's a layer, you can probably blur it. So throw in a Gaussian blur. You go back and blend some of it. Do a texture blender. And then you blend some of it so it doesn't have as much like detail. And you're just dealing with like selective areas of detail. Just the concept of like really fall pine trees. And you just kind of like work with each layer as you need to. And you can kind of like blend it together into like this concept and scene. And if you're like, I don't really like this composition, you take all three of them, transform, and just kind of like move it around. Maybe you want it to be lower and you want to show more of the sky, or you want to like slant it a bit for whatever reason. But it's just like the capability of these things. Like, there, this is already a great like foundation. Half of the trees already have details. Really what you're gonna have to do is like just kind of paint and blend away details of ones in the back, which wouldn't isn't going to be like super difficult. And the ones in the front, you may add like slightly more details, but you have like such a strong foundational concept of it that it's not just like simple shapes and it's like, okay, now we have to throw in all these massive details and textures and stuff like that. And even if you just wanted to handle it like a simple composition and just block things out from the get-go, you could still take one of the trees. I don't even have my tree file. I don't know where it is. Not gonna look at it. You can still take one of the trees or one of the rocks and like map out its texture. So like, I'll do an example right now. So take this guy, we'll copy him and we'll go to this one. And let's find out where is that thing? Right here. So we'll paste them right here. We take them, switch it to free transform. And then we just extend them out. And kind of like warp his shape. And then we're like, that's good. I feel like this got like a good section of it, right? And of course it autosaves now. Clip Studio Paint autosaves like literally every like 10 minutes. It's good, but it's also annoying. All right. And then we could just clipping mask it in there and change it. I don't know. Let's see. Multiply. Doesn't do good for the texture. Darken, not good for the texture. Overlay, not bad. We could do brightness. Brightness is a great way to do it. It's there. Brightness. Now we got the texture in there. And you know, if we wanted to blend with like the darkness, we could do like an extra pass on top. So just another layer that's just like this. We'll just use an airbrush just to be real quick. And we just start brushing in like details just to kind of like blend in its lighting. But now we have like this entire texture that's like starting to get fit in now. I don't like the way this looks. Let's do a little bit of that instead. But yeah, now we just immediately assimilated like the texture of that rock in there. And you could just like push it even further. Let's just Control J, duplicate that layer. And put this over here. And now we have like this texture here. And now it's more consistent and you could just keep painting into the rocks. Just adding to the tone. Probably take this away there, blend them together. It's easier to work with now because like all the rendering that would have made this rock look like this is kind of done. And you just skip to the overpainting stage instead of like simply establishing the texture and kind of the material and the base rendering of the entire image. So that is one of the first things that extremely helped. And so as you can see, like because I used these assets, stretched them, kind of like turned them into their own shapes and whatnot, I just started like slapping colors on top of them. Let me get rid of these layers. Let me throw the clouds back in there. And so yeah, as you can see here, I did like a little bit of overpainting, right? To kind of like bring in the consistency and add like some surface details of my own. Throw in some colors on a color layer on top of it just to give it like just a rough color treatment and vibe. Put in a random sword and then faded it because I wanted it there. And then I realized everything was like too detailed, too textured. And so I threw on this overpaint layer, try and like, you know, dim some of the contrast over here and like flatten some of the details, because all the details everywhere were taken away from the focal point, essentially. But that is not all. I did not only do this with mountains. I also did it with buildings. I don't think this is the right file I'm opening up, but I'll be able to find it. Here's a folder I did with buildings, and I essentially did the same thing because I knew I was going to be working, drawing a city for my comic. I just wanted to do a bunch of buildings that I felt like would fit and be in the area so that I could make brushes out of them, and it would make my life a million times easier. And it totally did. As soon as the brush will paint. There we go. See, so now I have this brush that draws all these buildings that I kind of already painted and put into an asset. And if I want to copy and paste these buildings and transform them into a certain perspective, I can do that too. But boom, this makes my life so much easier. This is such a godsend. It really is. And this is what I mean by increasing your efficiency in art. All these little tips, they are like a lot of time up front, but once you start getting into the flow, it just speeds everything down the road up exponentially, right? So it's kind of like when you're working in a kitchen and you dice up all like the vegetables and stuff and prep all the food, and it's pretty time consuming in the beginning. But while you're cooking, you don't have time to cut up peppers for every single dish that requires peppers. You just have to have them pre-cut, and then you throw them into the dish and start cooking and prepping them up. Because otherwise, that's the only way to keep up. Everything else is going to take up way too much time. So this right here, this is how we do it. This is our prep. This is our prep work for any projects or anything you do in the future. And the great thing is, as versatile as Clip Studio Paint is, if I wanted to make an asset out of this specific cliff, I could just flatten the layers, select that one, and do the same thing. And then this cliff that I painted with another cliff becomes another asset I can use in future projects. So every time you paint something, you can always take the old thing you painted and kind of like reuse it, reinvent it, emulate off of it. And this is a great way of being like extremely efficient as an artist, especially when you have like deadlines and a lot of things to like worry about. This is like just a great thing that's gonna like, help that speed and keep you going. And in that same vein, like, I take full advantage of all Clip Studio Paint assets. There are so many good assets on there, and Clip Studio Paint, I mean, not everybody entirely follows the rules there. So when something gets like redacted, like keep that in mind, take note. But theoretically, based on the way Clip Studio Paint handles their asset store, you can use any of the assets for any commercial endeavor you want to. As long as you get it off the asset store, you have full reign of that. You can't claim the actual asset. You can't claim ownership of like you see these assets here. That I think this is like an Egyptian building set, which is going to be ultra helpful, right? This is super awesome. I don't have to make one now, but so I can't say I own this building set, I'm going to resell it, but I can use this building set for anything I want to do. And this building set is essentially like the buildings I made myself, the buildings I painted. So I can take this building set, make it into brushes, copy it into whatever painting I want to. It'll work perfectly and save a shit ton of time. And so I recommend, if you're working on art, you're trying to keep things quick, totally take full advantage of this. And this is like how you need to be thinking about your process creatively. And on a final note, there is something important about all of these. Nothing beats foundational skills. Nothing is going to beat the fundamentals. None of these tools will help you if you just don't understand what it's supposed to look right. If you don't have your values down, your perspective down, anatomy, none of it can truly like make up for not understanding that. And so you're still going to have to study all that. But at the very least, when you have to get something done fast, these are tools at your disposal that you can do. And yeah, I forgot to click on the buildings that I had in here. There they are. See? Super familiar, right? They came straight from here. But yeah, I just decided to throw them in there because it only took a few seconds. I painted over them, blended them into the background, added some color. That sketch is not what I wanted in there. I will fix it later. But yeah, like all these things foundationally brought me to like the end product. And even then, after those those quick things that sped it up, still had to spend a lot of time painting. Still had all these other layers to do. That was just my work. So that's why it's like shortcut, but not really cheating. But yes, that is my tip for you today. And hopefully I didn't like ramble like a madman and in a completely incoherent way for like 30 minutes. In any case, that is all. Go out, make something awesome. Thank you for watching. I hope you'll come back to the channel sometime. And without further ado, enjoy your weekend, day, whatever it is for you. Deuces.